Hello, and welcome to First Bank's Center for Family-Owned Businesses webinar series. I'm Kim Reed, and I will be your facilitator. In today's session, we'll hear from a panel of female family business leaders on obstacles they've overcome, tips for developing confidence, and how they instill growth opportunities for future female business leaders in their organizations. And just a quick reminder, the lines are muted, but at any time, please send us your questions through the webinar tool. And at this time, I'll pass it over to the host of our program, Mr. Joe Ambrose. Joe, take it away.
Thanks, Kim. Good day to everyone and welcome. I'm Joe Ambrose, Executive Director of the First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses. Through the center, First Bank takes a holistic view of family-owned enterprises and delivers services to them beyond traditional banking products. These services are centered on an insight and advice that address the family component of family-owned businesses. Today, our own CEO, Shelley Seifert, will moderate a discussion with women leaders of their successful family businesses. And now, without further ado, Shelley Seifert.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome to everyone. We're just delighted to be with you today. We're looking forward to a conversation with four extraordinary women. So joining us today, we have Hanna, who's the president of Hanna Winery, Lupe Rodriguez, CFO of RMI International, her daughter Serah Larison, vice president of HR and admin at RMI, and Katie Hopkins, who's the president of Truck Centers Inc. Not only are these women among the elite cadre of women in C-suite roles in family-owned businesses, they lead businesses that are traditionally male-dominated businesses. Think about it, trucking, wineries, and security. So I look forward to learning a great deal today from these extraordinary trailblazers. I think we are missing two of our panelists, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully Lupe and Serah can jump in at any moment. But maybe just to get us started, I wanted to talk a little bit about your role in the family business and your journey to get there, because I think it's always interesting to understand how people end up in the roles that they're in. You took the helm of Hanna Wineries in 1991, and from what I understand, really took a family hobby or pastime into an iconic Sonoma winery, where you're shipping 50,000 cases of really, really good wine every year to people, a couple of which end up in my home and are quickly consumed, I have to admit. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey, how you ended up there and built this great winery?
Thanks, Shelley. So nice to be here with everyone. I took the helm in 1991, but really I started making wine when I was 14 years old with my dad. And it began as a hobby. We lived in San Francisco. My dad was a really busy cardiac surgeon, but he had grown up on a farm. And I think he really missed the sort of rhythms of farm life, and he wanted his kids to understand that. So in the late 70s, he bought 12 acres in what's now the Russian River Valley of Sonoma. Back then, it wasn't even a viticultural area yet. There was a dairy on one side of us and a horse farm on the other. And he bought these 12 acres, and there was a billy goat tied up in the yard, and there were chickens running around, and there were 12 head of steer in the back, and a creek running through it. And, it was really Shangri-La for us, coming from foggy San Francisco in the summer. And we were up there every weekend and during the summers and vacations. And we planted a garden and planted an orchard and planted some grapevines and started making some homemade wine. And I was the oldest of the 5 siblings. So my job was as assistant winemaker. And, we used the wine to entertain for friends who came over, and the bad vintages we used as marinade for the 12 head of steer in the back. And that was really how Hanna Winery started. And it wasn't until 1985 that we hired, a real winemaker, Mary Edwards, talk about iconic, just an iconic woman winemaker. And she was a great mentor for me, taught me so much about not just winemaking, but really how to be a woman in what was then, it was like a unicorn to be a woman in the wine business.
Mm-hmm.
So she was just a great mentor for me, and, and away we went. And then I came to work a few years after we started, and just lots of trial and error, and learned along the way. And with help and collaboration from other winemakers and winery owners.
Wow. What an amazing story. I didn't realize you had 5 siblings and you were the oldest. That's had to be a fun way to grow up, right?
Fun, kind of a circus, but fun, yes.
Good deal. And Katie, you're at the helm of another great success story, a family business that's grown. I think you just celebrated your 50th anniversary in 2020. And in those 50 years, you and your family have grown revenues from $1 million in that first year to $425 million. And you've built a thriving business based on values, based on quality customer service, and just really delivering a great product. Could you share your story with us?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So Chris, like you, one of 5 children also, and I'm also the oldest. Wonder if there's a little theme there. So my story, I joined the family business really when I was around 11 years old, I like to say. That was my first job with Truck Centers, answering the phones. Probably a pretty common story for anyone involved in a family business. We grow up around it. So my dad is the 2nd generation Hopkins. My grandfather actually founded the business in 1970, and then my dad took it over pretty much from around 72 on. So I joined, I kind of joke around 11 for the receptionist role, but then, through high school, then college, I always worked at the dealership in various capacities in all different departments over the years. When I went away to college, I got a degree in business administration, came home, got married, had my first son, and when I was looking for a more permanent career path, I really wanted to join a company that also had the family focus. It was really important to me to be able to spend important moments in time with my son, and then in the future my daughter as well. So the values that Truck Centers had as a family focused company really aligned with my personal values as well. So, and I had been around it really my whole life, so it was pretty much of a natural evolution for me to join in a more permanent capacity. Through the years, I've really worked in all different departments. My first job was the phones, then I was in accounts receivables. I worked as a service writer. I was parts driver at different points, office manager, assistant general manager, and then moved into the role of president and COO in early 2019. And as you said, Shelley, we've kind of grown organically through the years from the 1 location to now we have 10 dealerships in Illinois, Missouri, and Indiana. So thank you.
Great story. Thank you. Thanks for sharing it. And Serah, we're so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. Serah is also part of a great family business story, and this is a business that really your parents started, and in a pretty short time have built a company with 30 offices across the country, and of a real leader in providing security, private protection, consulting services, all of which I can imagine are in great demand. So Serah, do you mind sharing a little bit about your story with us?
Yes, actually my parents started the company when I was a young girl, and gave a lot of time and energy, both working 2 jobs, running the business, and having separate jobs to help support the family while they grow the business. I started working for the company in high school, answering the phone and just kind of doing some office tasks. And I remember my dad always tells this story. I told him, hey, no one ever calls. Why do I need to be here? No one ever calls. And he said, don't worry, they'll call. And 10 years later, we got a very large security contract with American Honda. And that just was the springboard for our business to take off, and made the right connections. And now we work with other large firms, including the Metro Transit, which a lot of people take to go to work every day. And so I really I was always with the company, just in some capacity. And my position with the company really took off about 5 years ago. We had a business partner. We needed more authority within the family. And they asked me if I would step up, and I said, I'll do it. And got my certification and just went from there. And it's been wonderful, and it's great to work with your family. It's a struggle at times, but I'm thankful where things are today.
That's terrific. I do think we're going to talk a little bit about family and business and the intersection, which I think can be a gift and also sometimes a little bit tricky. So we do want to talk about that. But before we go there, I don't think we can have a panel at this time without talking about the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic, and how each of you have really led your way through the pandemic. It's been an interesting time for women, I think. Studies show that women leaders excelled during this period. Studies show that women-led countries, states with women-led governors experienced lower deaths. There's studies on businesses during that period. But it's also a time when we saw a disproportionate number of women leaving the workforce. So a real kind of a mixture. I know, Katie, when you and I talked and you had just assumed the role of president, you were passionate about leadership development and leadership training in 2019, and then very quickly went straight into a pandemic. How do you think that positioned you for kind of managing through this?
Well, I certainly wasn't expecting the pandemic when we were working on leadership development. So I do think through the pandemic, our leadership on the front lines was obviously super essential. We were having to adapt quickly, moment by moment. We were an essential business, so we never shut down. So it was a matter of trying to figure out the safest way to continue to operate the business in all of these unknowns. You know, and with that said, we obviously stopped travel. So myself and the other owners, as well as our senior leadership team, normally we're traveling to all of our facilities very regularly. All of that is completely had to stop. So our leadership on the front lines and at the stores were even more important, you know, than they ever were before. So I think investing in leadership is always money well spent. I'm a passionate believer in that. And especially I feel in a dynamic where we're geographically really spread. It was worse during the pandemic because we couldn't travel at all. But even today, geographically spread, you know, the leadership on the front line has to really be able to represent what the ownership believes in terms of values and culture. So I think, you know, investing in that was super important. I mean, and it's an ongoing journey, you know, that we continue with investing in our leadership team.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the fact that you couldn't travel and you really were dependent in a time when people wanted leadership. So I'm sure that served you really well. And Chris, your winery experienced a record year, even though restaurants were closed, your tasting room was closed. A lot of the ways you would normally distribute wine were shut down, but you pivoted to create kind of a record year for the winery. Could you talk a little bit about how you made that happen? It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, pivot is right. Nothing like panic to pivot to require pivoting. You know, we had some good fortune in that wineries were considered an essential business, at least from the winemaking production side. So we were able to continue to keep the wines sort of going and things going in the cellar. Obviously, we have 2 tasting rooms, both of them were closed, so that was a real challenge. So we very quickly pivoted to our mailing list and our wine club members and reached out to them and kind of got everybody in the mode of, you can't visit, but you know, we can send you wine, and tried to get really creative and fun with our outreach to our mailing list and wine club members. And I will say that they just were, you know, our group was so loyal and generous, and, you know, bought wine and, you know, and really supported us during a super challenging time. And we did lots of virtual tastings. I did a series of corporate Zoom virtual tastings, which were a wonderful way to reach new customers, because that's really what we missed. We missed, not just the ongoing tasting room, traffic from members and folks who know us, but, also reaching new people and adding new people to Wine Club and to mailing lists. So these corporate Zoom events became a great way to add new people to the fold. And it, it really worked for the other corporations that we worked with, because they weren't able to do the kinds of customer reward and sales team reward activities that they would normally do. Nobody was doing, annual sales meetings, all of that. So this was a bit of a substitute, and so that helped us. And then secondarily, in the wholesale market, our wholesalers and distributors really focused on brands that were tried and true at the retail level. And, knock on wood, thankfully, Hanna Sauvignon Blanc was one of those brands that was a tried and true brand that sold through well, that customers knew. And our wholesaler partners just really doubled down on Sauvignon Blanc. And, my joke was, it was, toilet paper, hand sanitizer, and a bottle of Hanna Sauvignon Blanc ended up in people's carts. So, those two things really saved our bacon. I think that, I think sometimes when you're building a business, it feels like a bit of a, not a slog, but, you make this sort of incremental progress, and sort of similar to Serah, then sometimes there's a turning point where, where boom, and it felt like that moment for us, certainly out in the wholesale world. So creativity on the direct to consumer side, and really just I think just a moment of recognition on the wholesale side.
Having created that brand loyalty, and I know most of my friends would say wine was an essential business during the pandemic. There just seemed to be a little question about that. So good deal. And Serah, I think you had by far the toughest job of all. All of us, I think, go to sleep at night and think, thank goodness I wasn't in HR during the pandemic, trying to manage through the health risk and just all the questions around people that came to the forefront. They're always at the forefront, but boy, did it become magnified during the pandemic. As you look back on the last 18 months, what are your biggest takeaways?
I think the biggest takeaway for our group, myself in particular, is the ability to be flexible and adjust. We're essential workers, as the rest of the ladies on this panel, and we provide security services. Our administrative employees at our corporate office, there's just under 30 of us. Our sole purpose is to facilitate for the field workers, almost 1,000 workers across the US. And we can't stop. Our clients needed us more than ever. A lot of them even added services while things were shutting down. So I decided, a friend of mine called me and said, I'm a teacher. I got my hours cut so bad. I know everyone's working from home. Can I tutor your daughter? And I said, can you come and help all the kids come to our office? And we set up a big room. We distanced all the children. We put panels between them. We did all the safety precautions we could. And she proctored education for 1.5 years for 10 children from our office workers. And it was a wonderful thing to be able to help the parents from our office staff, but it was also just great to see the kids be able to interact with each other. We had them in separate pods, so they were kind of kept distance from the other children, and we were able to rotate schedules, and it really was successful. And I feel that we were able to facilitate without stopping for our field workers and our clients. And I think that you make it work, you figure out a way. And that's really what we pushed for. And everyone was super cooperative and very, very cautious about being safe with each other and the risks that were involved with continuing to work during the pandemic. So it was a great project, and it's over now. Unfortunately, all the children fortunately, all the children are back to school. But it was wonderful that we were able to do that for our team, and it was successful.
It's one of my favorite stories of the pandemic is the creativity to, engage that teacher who needed that activity, and then support your employees. I think one of the things we've been so impressed with is with every family business with whom we work, the creativity and the passion and the ability to pivot has just been really impressive. So thanks for sharing all that. When I think about each of you and when I have conversations with you, you kind of take my breath away with all that you have on your plate and all that you manage in any given day. I wondered if you'd share with all of us a little bit about your secrets to maintaining what I'm sure is not always the healthiest of work-life balance or always the most balanced of work-life balance, but somehow you manage to get to do it all and make it never have a ball drop. So Serah, if we could start with you, because you do have a young daughter and you were faced with a lot of challenges during the pandemic. Could you talk a little bit about how you maintain that balance?
Sure. My daughter is 8 years old. She's in the 3rd grade. And she's been in and out of our family business from day one. And I pretty much never stopped working once I had her, but I was back full time in the office at 6 weeks. And thankfully, we have a wonderful large family and everyone supported me in caring for her while I was back at work. And I think for me, it's prioritization. It's, I prioritize my work during work hours. Emergencies happen, we take care of those and try to prioritize family time at family time. And it's a struggle. It always is. I come from a large Latin family and all of us work for the business. So it is not always easy during non-work hours to separate that business conversation. And I think that my mom and I have done, as best we can to encourage everyone, family time is family time and work time is work time. And it's nice to be able to respect each other's personal spaces. And I think for myself personally, it's all about, prioritizing what is needed right now. And that's not always easy, but it seems to be working better, particularly now that my daughter's back in school. So, but it's been it's great, and the family's super supportive. So I'm very, very thankful for that.
So really trying to create those boundaries, recognizing emergencies, but creating those boundaries wherever you can. Great advice.
Absolutely, yes.
And Chris, I know in addition to being president of this iconic winery, you're also an author, a mother, a daughter, a very, very active volunteer. And I read an article once that said you can throw a heck of a party. So it sounds like more than a full plate for anyone. How do you make it all work?
Well, first of all, I was raised by an immigrant who really came from very humble roots and came to this country and went to medical school and became a world-class cardiac surgeon. So, just to put it into perspective, unless I start my day saying, I saved 20,000 lives today, the accomplishments are, the accomplishments are put into perspective. So I will say that so much of what I think we all do as the Hanna family is driven by the example that we got that we have of a father who really accomplished so much. So, so there's that's sort of humbling and puts it in perspective. But, I think it's also about teamwork on every level, right? I've got a great, life partner, my husband, especially in the early years when our son Brian was young, he was able to take a little bit more time to be at home, and we tag teamed really well. And then, as the business grew, I developed a senior team of folks who could certainly take the lead when they needed to, and so that I could be home when I needed to. And that's really helped. And I think as we've continued to grow the winery, those folks on my team, have been able to run their departments and do it with autonomy. And that makes them feel good about what they're doing. It provides a career path and, allows me to have kind of life. Although to be realistic, we're in the middle of harvest now and, there's no day off. I mean, it's, we pick every day of the week and, and we're going around the clock. And that's part of the understanding too, that you're going to have, really times of real compression and, and then other times where you have to recognize, okay, there's not a lot going on now, so now I get to take a vacation, or now I get to have a short day. So it's balancing in that regard.
Thank you. I do think perspective is a pretty powerful driver and building a great team. Thanks. And Katie, when you and I talked this spring, I heard what you had on the agenda for the next 5 months, and my head was spinning. I think you had a big graduation that maybe turned into a virtual kind of party, 2 weddings, and your husband's early retirement, all kind of compressed into a really tight time frame. And you're running a very demanding business at probably the most demanding time in the business's history with all that's going on. How do you make it work?
Well, I wouldn't have minded had the events been a little bit more spread apart, I'll be honest. It was a lot of life events all in one, few month window. However, we are 1 wedding down, the retirement, the graduation, and actually last weekend I moved my daughter to Chicago, where she just got her first full-time job. So excited for that. But yeah, life is always busy, right? But really special experiences. And I think, as you said, it's a super busy time and at work at this point, as well as all these personal events. And really, to keep myself sane, I just tried to focus on the event at hand and the work at hand. So because kind of worrying about what was going to happen in 2 months or all of these different items, it didn't help anything in that moment. In terms of balance, like Chris said, I can definitely relate to that. It kind of ebbs and flows what your business needs are. Sometimes, during those trying months of the pandemic, I mean, you're working, I don't know, round the clock from the time you wake up basically till the time you're going to bed. And then other times it slows down and you can take the vacation. As far as completely shutting it off, I think that's a little bit more challenging probably in certain roles. I try, but it is hard if I do go on vacation to not, occasionally check that phone and people know that they can, kind of always reach me. So I do think it's an ongoing challenge that I try to keep a focus on, that I need to be healthy physically and mentally for the job as well. So I try to prioritize time for working out and, time for doing the things that I love. But I would say it's one of those that's an ongoing challenge in this kind of role.
Love that. Well, thanks for sharing that. As I think about each of you, you had to take big risks to do what you do. I mean, you're among an elite group of women leaders, you're in male-dominated businesses, and you've just emerged, hopefully soon, from a pandemic. Curious what you'd say was your biggest risk. What was the biggest risk you've taken and why, and how that really worked for you? Maybe Katie, if we could start with you.
Sure. So I would say probably my biggest risk up to this point in my career, I was offered the opportunity to take the general manager role of our St. Louis dealership when I was 25 years old. So I'd been around the business, much of my life and worked in all these different capacities, but I'd never actually led people. And I was young, 25 is pretty young. And also, being a woman in a more male-dominated business, I kind of had that aspect as well. So I really wanted the opportunity, though, and I worried that if I didn't take it at this point, that I wouldn't, have another chance. Looking back, I probably would have, but hindsight's always 20/20. So I took that role, and I remember just being super nervous in that first meeting with the team where I was being introduced as their general manager, wondering how I was going to, work through the challenges of managing and learning to lead. I was really fortunate to have inherited a wonderful team of people in that St. Louis store. And so, over the 15 years that I was the general manager there, just had the opportunity to learn and grow from a lot of great mentors there, and ultimately, led me to future positions inside the organization. So it was a big risk at the time, but it definitely paid off, and I would definitely take that risk again.
Thanks. And Serah?
I think, well, there's a few things, but I think when I finally was asked to step up and take on a bigger role, I was a little bit apprehensive. I think because, I grew up in the business, I grew up watching my parents be the leaders. I think I felt a little bit intimidated by what I understood the responsibility to be. And I went ahead and just said, well, what's the worst that could happen, right? I mean, they're still my family. And so I think that was probably the biggest risk. I think as a business, our family has taken several risks. In 2018, my dad bought out his minority shareholder in the business, and we once again became 100% owners of our family company. So that was a huge risk. And thank you, First Bank, for helping and support us through that transaction. It was a very tough experience, but it was wonderful to know we had the support of our First Bank team. And I think, as women, we are constantly taking on risks in the workforce, particularly industries such as ours, where it's male dominated. And, I think for me, the reward is always worth it. And, even when you make mistakes, it's starting over, it's learning from that. And it's just every day feeling that I have the support that I need to do my job and take the calculated risks that are necessary.
Thank you. And Chris?
The biggest risk I took was scaling this Sauvignon Blanc program. And it wasn't, I would say that it was not a popular position among the family. So it was sort of like, okay, but it better work. And it required, investment in equipment. It required investment in purchasing grapes because we didn't have enough Sauvignon Blanc planted. And so we really went out on a limb financially. And similar to Serah, First Bank really partnered with us around that. And we're patient while we recovered from that investment. And, it was at a time where, Chardonnay and Cabernet were king. So taking a flyer on Sauvignon Blanc, although, that may not seem like such a risk now, was an enormous risk back then. But I saw an opportunity in the marketplace and I figured, we might as well take it. I knew we could make a really delicious wine. The question was, could we scale it across the country? And when we have our distributors, behind us, and thankfully it worked, and we were able to, dig out of the debt hole faster than we thought that we could, and it really is the fact that the Sauvignon Blanc is so well distributed across the country is the reason we survived COVID, and I think the reason that we'll have a sustainable winery for generations.
That's terrific. It certainly sounds like a bet that paid off big time. So that's exciting. Serah, you've commented a couple times about family and business and the strengths and yet some of the challenges. One of my favorite books, Josh Barron published a book called The Family Business Handbook this year. And he talks about really creating separate spaces for family versus business kinds of conversations. Just curious how you guys balance family. Is it even possible to separate that and have separate spaces for family conversations versus business? How does all that work? Chris, could we start with you? And you have 5 siblings, so.
Yeah, I would humbly say that we have not figured that out. I think it's really hard, when you're in business together, and aside from the winery, we've got some real estate holdings together, and so I think for us it's more of a blend. And my father always talked about his work at the table, and we looked at pictures of cardiac surgery at dinner, and it was just that it was just part of life's rich pageant. And so I think that is okay on some level. What we did learn, though, is when you have to deliver bad news and in challenging years where things aren't going as well, you probably don't want to have a family meeting right before Thanksgiving, for example. You know, so I think those, you know, when things are going well, the meetings go well. But I think we learned some boundaries around timing that have been helpful. And again, this is an ongoing practice. You know, we will evolve. We will continue to evolve around this issue. But I'm curious if the other women on the call have figured it out better than the Hanna family has.
I do think we'll all take the tip as the holidays approach to think about the messaging during the holidays. Great advice. And Katie, I know you have family in the business and around the business.
Yes. So I think that I guess third generation, my brother and myself have this figured out a little bit better than the second generation. So, you know, with my dad, it's rarely separate discussions. I mean, which, you know, isn't really always, I agree with Chris, not a bad thing. We do a lot of walking meetings. So inevitably we'll be talking about workplace issues, and then it'll blend into some family things, and then it blends back into the workplace things, and back and forth and back and forth. And probably because I grew up like that, it seems pretty natural. But then I would say, you know, with my brother and myself, we do make a cognizant effort that when we're, you know, doing fun social things together, getting together for 4th of July or going, you know, tailgating or whatever we're doing, we do try to keep that separation. Spend a lot more time talking about our families and, you know, our kids than we would as far as work. So I think it's kind of changing as we're evolving into the future generations. But I don't think it's possible to completely ever separate it, because I mean, you know, you're celebrating Thanksgiving, but then you're back at work that next Monday trying to figure out, you know, how you're going to grow the business or how you're going to do X, Y, and Z inside the business. So they're inevitably merged, you know, in some deep way.
Yeah, so it'd feel artificial to try to separate them. Makes sense. Well, I have one last question, then I'll turn it to Kim to see any questions for our audience, but this is my favorite question. So as the mother of a daughter who's the joy of my life, I know all three of you have extraordinary daughters, and I'm just curious what advice you would give to your daughters, or really to anyone in the next generation thinking about involvement in the family business, and for the people on the call. So if we could, Chris, start with you.
Sure. My advice to my daughter, as well as, you know, other women and people, is to be fierce, you know, not to be afraid to go against the grain and to disagree, and to, you know, push a different idea. And I think there's a kind of zeitgeist now around collaborative decision making, and while I think that's valuable, I also think that it sometimes leads to groupthink, and it's really important to, you know, to speak up if you have a different idea or don't agree with something. And particularly for women, I think we've all probably been in meetings where, you know, a woman will say something and then a man will say the exact same thing, and somebody will say, well, I agree with what Jim said. And, you know,
what a brilliant idea, yeah.
So it's just even more important for women to use their voice, and, you know, and to not be afraid to throw an elbow now and then.
I like it. Be fierce. Thank you. And Katie?
So I've really always told my daughter, and really both of my children, that I hope that they would find careers doing something that they loved. So to me, you know, when you find something that you love to do, and it's also your work, it's never going to really seem like work. And that's really what my dream was for both of my children, to find that career path, whether it was in our business or whether it was not. It really did not matter to me, as long as it was something that they could be passionate about. And then also find work that's aligned with your personal values. So if you're working, you know, for someone else or a different company, really making sure that that company has values aligned with your own, so that you can kind of stay in alignment as you go through your career. And I think it just makes for a healthier person in general.
That's great. So that values alignment, that's great advice. And Serah, I know your daughter's only 8, but it's never too young to start having conversations.
Yes. My message currently to my daughter is be a risk taker, believe in yourself. She's a very outgoing young lady, which is a blessing. And I want to just harness that energy and help her be proud of herself and, excuse me, my dogs, and just, continue to take risks and be confident in her decisions, and understand you will make mistakes. That's my primary emphasis for her today. And I'm sure that's going to change over time as she becomes a woman. But I want her to take risks and I want her to be confident in her decision making.
I love that. Well, thank you. That is wonderful advice. And I think we wish that for all of our daughters. So I'm going to turn it to Kim for questions from the audience. But before I do, I just personally want to thank each of you for being part of this, for the role models that you are to me, to other women, and actually to people everywhere. You've just made a real difference. And it's been really a pleasure to talk with you. Kim, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you. Yes, we do have just a couple of questions. First one, we all have influencers in our lives. So who has had the most influence on your leadership style within your family as well as outside of the family?
Chris, you want to say?
I'll volunteer. I'd say influencers, my grandparents and my parents. And I think that there's just something to be said about work ethic. And on all generations on both sides of my family, there's just been incredible work ethic. I mean, people working multiple jobs, trying, just pushing themselves outside the box, whether it's out of necessity to support their family or ambition to make a better opportunity for the next generation. So I would say my grandparents, my parents have been the biggest influencers in my professional life, just really pushing the envelope, and everyone, work hard every day. It's like there's not enough hours in the day. And I think that there is something to be said about that. And then as generations have come in my family, the younger generations, just like Katie, we're encouraging experiences and, things outside of work. So I think but it's been a huge influence in my life and really the driving force behind, my position today.
Yeah, I'll echo Serah. My father was a great influence. The combination of get it done yesterday, do it with excellence, and and sort of be tireless about it. Like, don't, he's not a super relaxed guy. And that was great to grow up around, because you see that kind of hard work, what the result of that hard work. So he was was and is a great influence, although, he's 85 years old now and an entirely different sort of gentle, sweet guy. I think the advent of that many grandchildren changes your brain chemistry. But he was a great influence. And then Mary Edwards, the winemaker that I talked about, was such a great influence, both as a winemaker, as a businesswoman. She had 2 children, including a special needs child at home, and had a great marriage and, a partner who was really active with her in the business. So she sort of represented the whole enchilada, to me, and just continued throughout my career to be kind of a guiding light. And, even if I didn't talk to her directly, just knowing that she was there and continuing to flourish and grow her business was a great influence.
Sounds really special. Good. Katie?
Yeah, so inside the family, I would say my grandmother, has always been an incredible mentor to me. So she had 6 children. She and my grandfather had many businesses through their lives together. And, as a child, I can remember going and visiting. At one point, they own a marina at the Lake of the Ozarks. And every single morning at 5 a.m., she's out there swimming laps. She's up feeding us breakfast, you know, making a full homemade breakfast, downstairs, then working all day, and then, you know, back upstairs cooking dinner. Valued faith, you know, church was an important part for her, and really represented that with our family well. So I think that she showed me just the value of like balance of hard work, and you can still have a family as a strong priority. And you know, her children all just adore her still today, and she has, I don't know, 25 grandchildren or something, and great grandchildren. So, and she's still sharp as a whip. So a great mentor there. And then inside the business, I had a mentor probably in the 80s. She was a general manager. She was the first, one of the first general managers, I think, in the truck, heavy duty truck business. And I was fortunate to work for her. And she's really was just a spitfire, I will say. Her name is Jan Krieger. And she really showed me just that you always have to be driving higher. She had very high expectations for me, you know, and I think that when you have high expectations set for you, you live up to them. So hard work and going the extra mile were some of the lessons that I learned from her. So fortunate to have both of those mentors in my life, definitely.
Sounds like it.
Okay, we do have another question. As family-owned businesses, how do you find non-family managers that you trust?
Good question.
I'll jump in because I've got two employees. Our winemaker who's been with us since 1998, and Jeff Hinchliff, and then Yvonne Lazinto, our controller, who's been with us since my son was born. So that's, you know, 19 years ago now. So long stand, and they are just anchors for, you know, for Hanna. And, you know, hiring is hard. You know, you interview people a couple of times, you try to see them in different, you know, in different environments. And on some level, you have to trust your gut and take a risk. But I will say that, you know, with Jeff, when Jeff came to interview me, I noticed that he came in and he had grape must underneath his fingernails. And, you know, he just looked like a guy who was not afraid to get on in there. You know, there's sort of two kinds of winemakers. There are winemakers who like to do the work orders and, you know, like to do the blending and not necessarily get in there and do the hard work. And I didn't need that. You know, I can do that part. What I really needed was somebody who was going to get, you know, down and dirty and into it. And also, you know, Jeff had at that time when we hired him, he had 4 small children at home, and a really lovely wife who I got to meet. And, you know, that all said, okay, your values align with ours, that sort of work ethic, you know, working hard for the family. And that has certainly been the case. You know, he's an extremely intelligent guy. I got that right off the bat interviewing him. And so all those values kind of aligned and worked. And with Yvonne, you know, I met her and Brian was days old, and I really needed a finance partner, somebody who was going to be my right hand in that regard. And I had her interview with me once in a normal setting. And then I had her interview me with Brian in the room, with my son in the room, just to sort of see how she was with a little family chaos. Mm-hmm. And she was, of course, cool as a cucumber because she was raising 2 babies herself, was very clear about how, as much as she loved them, she loved being at work and being able to walk out the door and go to work and, you know, have that life and come back. And she's just been a terrific partner ever since, you know, for 19 years. I can't imagine running the business without her. So how do you find them? I think you just find people whose values align with yours, and then you know, reward them along the way, have them participate in the success. And if you're lucky, you get people who are with you for decades.
Nice.
I absolutely agree. I was going to say something in the entirely same vein, and I think you're right. Finding those people whose values align, and then treating them and embracing them as your family. provides that, dedication to not only the business, but to the family. When we all have the common goal, the business will succeed. And it's, a lot of our successful management has been found via word of mouth, but some of them have been just straight from an advertisement, and just seeing those core values in people and searching for those types of characteristics, I think, is what leads to successful business relationship and longevity.
Yeah, and for us, I would say that Truck Centers is a company that we generally always promote from within. It's very seldom that we're bringing in someone from the outside. I would completely agree that on the hires that we've done from the outside, we definitely are searching for cultural connection and value alignment, because I think without that, it's not going to work in the long run. But otherwise, we really love seeing people that might have started, in a certain position and be able to continue to be promoted. Our director of operations, he started as a service technician, for example. The vice chairman of our company and also one of the minority owners started as a body shop painter. So we have a lot of those types of stories within inside of our leadership, and that's served us pretty well over the years.
And I will add, as a non-family manager, if you're in a family where your values are aligned, there's no better job. Just the long-term perspective and the agility and the commitment, there's just no better job. So thank you. Kim, anything else?
No, I think that's it. Thank you for the questions, and ladies for sharing those insights. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and very special thank you to Chris, Serah, and Katie for their time and expertise. We do ask if you would please just take a few moments to complete a brief survey to help us improve our service. And with that, I will pass it back over to Joe for some closing thoughts.
Hey, thanks to Shelley, Christine, Katie, and Serah for an outstanding discussion today. And more importantly, Christine, Katie, and Serah, thank you for choosing First Bank to be your bank. We greatly appreciate the relationship that we have with all of you. Everybody else, thanks for joining us, and please mark your calendars for November 9th at 11 Central Time for our next webinar. Details will be forthcoming. And if you want to get in touch with Christine, Katie, or Serah, please let us know, and we'll pass along their contact info. I think what you heard today from them will make you want to get to know them better. So thanks, everybody, and stay healthy.
Thanks, everybody.